Retired human lived alone for years, until 11 alien widows begged for shelter on his ranch without short heading 0402. 15 years on Kepler 442b, and he still wasn't used to the triple sunset. His weathered hands gripped a cup of synthetic coffee, the steam rising in lazy spirals as the evening wind picked up across the endless grasslands. At 68 years old, Marcus had perfected the art of solitude. His ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of frontier land, far enough from the nearest settlement that he could go months without seeing another soul. That was exactly how he wanted it. The cattle lowed in the distance, a mix of earth Herefords and the native hexapods he'd crossbred over the years. The hexapods were ugly creatures, six-legged and covered in scales, but they were hardy and their meat fetched good prices at the trading posts. Not that Marcus needed much money anymore. He had everything he required right here: his land, his animals, his memories, and his grief. Sarah had been dead for 17 years now. 17 years since the Krill invasion turned Earth's outer colonies into graveyards. She'd been on the medical frigate Compassion when it was hit. They told him she didn't suffer, that the hull breach was instant. Marcus didn't know if that made it better or worse. He'd retired from the Earth Defense Force 6 months after her funeral, sold everything, and bought this patch of nothing on a world most people couldn't even pronounce correctly. The detector array on his northern fence line pinged softly. Marcus frowned. Probably another meteor fragment or space debris. The system was full of junk from the war, even after all these years. He set down his coffee and walked to the control panel inside his workshop, a converted barn that smelled of machine oil and dried grass. The screen showed something larger than debris, much larger, a ship, and it was coming down fast, too fast. Marcus watched the trajectory with the practiced eye of a former logistics commander. The vessel was going to crash, and it was going to crash on his property. He grabbed his rifle, an old, reliable plasma Winchester, and climbed into his beat-up hover truck. As he raced across the grasslands, he could see the ship now, a silver streak against the darkening sky, trailing smoke and fire. It hit the ground 3 miles from his main house, carving a trench through the purple grass and sending up a plume of dirt and debris. By the time Marcus arrived, the ship's emergency systems were venting steam, and the hull was groaning like a dying animal. The side hatch had been blown open from the inside, and figures were stumbling out into the twilight. Marcus raised his rifle, then slowly lowered it. They weren't soldiers, they weren't raiders, they were families. 11 women of various alien species emerged from the wreckage, many carrying children or helping the injured. Marcus recognized a few of the species from his service days. Velkins with their chitinous exoskeletons and multiple limbs, moving with insected grace despite their obvious exhaustion. Thuri, their crystalline bodies catching the fading light and throwing rainbow patterns across the grass. Morvani, humanoid but with skin that seemed to ripple like water, their large eyes blinking against the dry air. Others he didn't recognize. An older Velkin female approached him, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Her carapace was a deep purple-black, marked with scars that spoke of a hard life. When she spoke, her translator rendered her clicking speech into accented standard. "Please," she said simply. "We mean no harm. Our ship is damaged beyond repair. We need shelter." Marcus looked past her at the group. 23 children by his quick count, ranging from infants to adolescents. The adults looked exhausted, some injured. Their clothes were worn, their few possessions clutched in arms or stuffed into salvaged bags. Refugees. He'd seen enough of them during the war. "This is private property," Marcus said, his voice gruff. "Nearest settlement is 200 miles east." "We cannot make it that far," the Velkin replied. Her compound eyes reflected the sunset, making it impossible to read her expression, but her voice carried a weight of absolute truth. "We have no fuel, no supplies. Some of us are injured. The children need rest and food." "Not my problem," Marcus said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were hollow. He looked at the children again. A small Velkin youngster was crying, a thin keening sound that reminded him of Earth crickets. A Thuri child, no bigger than a human 5-year-old, held tight to what Marcus assumed was their mother, their crystalline body dimmed with fear or fatigue. "We can work," the Velkin said quickly, sensing his hesitation. "We are not asking for charity. Give us shelter, even temporary, and we will earn our keep. I am Shiva. These are widows of the frontier wars. Our husbands died fighting the krill, same as many of your people. We seek only safety for our children. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. The krill. The war that took Sarah. He wanted to tell them no, to send them away, to maintain the carefully constructed isolation he'd built. But he saw Sarah in their desperate faces. She would have helped them without a second thought. She'd always been the better person. 3 months, Marcus heard himself say. 1 season, you work, you stay. I've got a barn you can use for shelter, but you pull your weight on this ranch, understood? I'm not running a charity operation. Shiva's antennae twitched in what might have been relief. Thank you. You will not regret this. I already regret it, Marcus muttered, but he was already calculating what supplies he'd need to accommodate 34 unexpected guests. Follow me and keep the kids away from the southern pasture. The hexapods get territorial during breeding season. The first week was chaos. The barn Marcus had offered turned out to be woefully inadequate for the diverse needs of 11 different species. The Morvani needed constant humidity and nearly dehydrated before Shiva convinced Marcus to let them convert his irrigation reservoir into a living space. The Thuri children's bioluminescence kept everyone awake at night until Marcus jury-rigged blackout curtains from old tarp material. The Velkin younglings, curious and fearless, managed to open the cattle pen, leading to a 3-hour roundup that left Marcus exhausted and cursing. But slowly, things began to change. The Velkin adults, it turned out, were natural engineers. They looked at Marcus's decades-old equipment, the machines he'd been nursing along with spare parts and prayers, and within days had them running better than new. They redesigned his water filtration system, increasing efficiency by 40%. They reinforced his fences using techniques Marcus had never seen, weaving local plant fibers with salvaged ship metal to create barriers that were both flexible and incredibly strong. The Thuri, once Marcus got over his initial discomfort with their crystalline forms, proved invaluable for night work. Their natural luminescence meant no need for floodlights during evening repairs or animal checks. The children especially loved helping with the hexapods, their gentle light seeming to calm the normally skittish creatures. The Morvani, living in and around the reservoir, discovered they could sense approaching weather through water pressure and temperature changes. They warned Marcus of a storm 3 days before his own instruments detected it, giving him time to secure equipment and move the herds to sheltered valleys. The storm, when it hit, was one of the worst he'd seen in years. Without the warning, he would have lost animals and possibly buildings. Marcus maintained his gruff exterior, barking orders and complaining about the noise and the disruption to his routine. But he noticed things. The way Shiva organized work details with military precision, ensuring everyone contributed according to their abilities. The way the mothers took turns watching all the children, not just their own, creating a collective family. The way they sang in the evenings, haunting melodies in languages he didn't understand, but which spoke of loss and hope in equal measure. One night, 2 months into their stay, a particularly violent storm rolled across the grasslands. Thunder cracked like artillery fire, and the wind threatened to tear the barn roof off. Marcus was in his workshop, reinforcing the door seals, when he heard a small sound behind him. He turned to find Tik-Tik, a young Velkin child huddled in the corner, mandibles chattering with fear. Marcus sat down heavily on his workbench, the storm raging outside like an angry beast. Tik-Tik's large compound eyes reflected the flashing lightning, and the child's whole body trembled. Marcus wasn't good with kids, never had been. Sarah had wanted children, but the war came and then she was gone and the question became irrelevant. "Hey," Marcus said awkwardly. "It's just a storm. This building has survived worse." Marcus sighed and patted the bench beside him. Tik-Tik climbed up with surprising speed, settling into a compact ball of chitin and fear. "Your name is Tik-Tik, right?" Marcus asked. The child nodded, a very human gesture that looked strange on the insectoid body. "You know, storms on Earth sound different, deeper. The thunder rolls instead of cracks. My wife loved thunderstorms. Used to sit on the porch and watch them come in across the plains." Tik-Tik gradually stopped shaking and eventually fell asleep against his side, tiny clawed hands gripping his shirt. When Shiva found them at dawn, Marcus was still awake, one hand resting protectively on the sleeping child. "His father saved my supply convoy during the Battle of Rigel Station," Shiva said quietly. Held off a krill boarding party long enough for the ships to jump. He was among the last to evacuate. We did not wish to burden you with our stories when you so clearly carry your own. Shiva's antennae moved in a gesture Marcus had learned meant thoughtfulness. But perhaps it is time we all spoke of such things. The dead deserve to be remembered. As they worked, the widows shared their stories. Husbands lost to the krill, homes destroyed, years spent drifting from one refugee camp to another. They spoke of the new threat, the Dominion, a corporate military entity that was seizing frontier worlds and calling it legal salvage. They claim unclaimed worlds are corporate assets, Shiva explained as she expertly pruned an overgrown rose bush. Refugees have no rights to land. They move us, work us, discard us when we are no longer profitable. You're running. You have built something beautiful here, Marcus Webb. We are grateful you allowed us to see it, even briefly. Dominion survey vessels, their transponders broadcasting corporate ownership claims. Marcus pulled up the Galactic Homestead Law on his ancient computer terminal and read through it twice. There was a provision, rarely used, that allowed multi-species cooperatives to claim frontier land if they could prove active development and defense. He found Shiva in the barn, teaching Velkan children how to calibrate plasma welders. We need to talk, he said. Privately. If they found refugees squatting on unclaimed land, the Dominion had legal authority to remove them. Violently, if necessary. However, Marcus continued, pulling up the Homestead Law, if we file a claim as a cooperative community, they can't touch us. It requires proof of multi-species collaboration, permanent structures, and active defense capability. You've been working this land for 2 months. You've improved it. By the letter of the law, you've earned the right to stay. I'm just filing the paperwork. I spent 30 years in military logistics. I know how to make supply lines a nightmare. This land, these hills and valleys, I know every inch. If they want us gone, they'll have to work for it. You would fight. Maybe it's time we all stopped running from the things that hurt us and started protecting what we found. It was legal, barely, hanging on technicalities and goodwill provisions in century-old settlement laws. Marcus gave it 50-50 odds of standing up to corporate lawyers. The odds got worse when the Dominion Enforcer ship landed 2 weeks later. 50 mercenaries in powered armor deployed across Marcus's southern pasture, led by a thin human in a corporate suit who introduced himself as Executive Vren. Marcus met them at his property line, rifle slung across his back, Shiva and 3 other widows standing behind him. Marcus Webb, Vren said, consulting a datapad. Retired Earth Defense Force. You filed a spurious claim on corporate-designated salvage territory. We're here to facilitate your relocation. There's a compensation package, quite generous actually, for your cooperation. Multi-species cooperatives require genuine integration, not convenient arrangements to circumvent salvage law. Vren smiled without warmth. The Xenos can be relocated to appropriate facilities. You, being human, can leave with full compensation. This doesn't have to be difficult. And I take responsibility seriously. You want this land? Come take it, but I promise you it'll cost more than you're willing to pay. This is one of them. Instead, he taught them the human art of making things difficult. The first wave of Dominion mercenaries advanced across the eastern approach, their powered armor glinting in the triple sunrise. They moved in textbook formation, confident in their superior firepower and numbers. What they didn't know was that Marcus had spent 3 days with the Morvani, carefully flooding the irrigation channels and underground aquifers. The ground that looked solid was actually saturated clay over water-filled cavities. The lead squad made it 50 meters before their half-ton armor suits punched through the surface. Suddenly, 12 mercenaries were waist-deep in thick mud, their servos whining uselessly as they tried to extract themselves. The following squads hesitated, trying to find solid ground, their perfect formation breaking apart. That's when the Thuri children, positioned in the hills with Marcus's guidance, began their work. They'd practiced for 2 days, learning to angle their crystalline bodies to catch and refract sunlight. Now, dozens of reflected beams danced across the valley, overwhelming the mercenaries' thermal sensors and targeting systems. Through their helmet displays, they saw phantom heat signatures everywhere and nowhere, their weapons systems locking onto empty air. Marcus watched from his position in a carefully camouflaged hide, a spot he'd prepared years ago without quite knowing why. Shiva crouched beside him, monitoring communications on a salvaged Dominion radio they'd pulled from the crashed ship. "Their commander is angry," Shiva reported, her translator rendering the intercepted cursing into polite standard. "He is calling for the second wave." It was the obvious alternate route, which is exactly why Marcus had spent a day with the Velkin engineers, studying the canyon walls. The Velkins had an instinct for structural weaknesses that Marcus's human eyes would have missed. They'd identified 3 key points where the rock was already fractured, stressed by centuries of thermal expansion and contraction. As the mercenaries entered the canyon, moving cautiously now, wary of more traps, Marcus gave the signal. The Velkins triggered the carefully placed charges, small explosives made from fertilizer and fuel that Marcus had mixed himself. The charges weren't meant to kill, just to destabilize. The canyon walls didn't collapse so much as slump, thousands of tons of rock and dirt sliding down to block both ends of the passage. The mercenaries weren't buried, but they were trapped, and it would take hours to dig them out. "This is insane," came Vren's voice over the open channel, no longer bothering with pleasantries. "Webb, you're just delaying the inevitable. We have orbital superiority. We can level this entire ranch from space if we choose. And I've been bouncing those transmissions through the old EDF relay network. By now, half the frontier worlds know the Dominion is attacking a legal homestead and threatening to orbital bombard civilians." Then Vren spoke again, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You're bluffing. And right now you're committing acts that look an awful lot like war crimes to anyone watching." Marcus smiled in his hiding spot. "So go ahead, fire from orbit, make me a martyr and give the frontier worlds a reason to unite against Dominion expansion. I'm an old man. I've got nothing to lose." Corporations thought in terms of profit and loss, and right now, this operation was rapidly becoming more trouble than it was worth. "You have 12 hours to evacuate," Vren finally said. "After that, we're coming in with lethal force authorization." "We wait." Marcus remained above ground with Shiva and 4 other adult widows who had insisted on staying. They monitored the Dominion forces from various positions, watching as the mercenaries regrouped and reorganized. 8 hours into the deadline, Marcus's ancient computer terminal chimed. He'd almost forgotten about it, buried as it was under maps and tactical displays. The message header made his heart skip. "EDF Cruiser Determination, this is Captain Sarah Chen. We received your distress relay. Are you the Marcus Webb, formerly of the 7th Logistics Division? I'm surprised anyone remembered that old call sign. Can you hold? You might want to read it before you do anything stupid." Fighting refugees on a frontier ranch was one thing. Engaging an Earth Defense Force cruiser was entirely another. "This isn't over, Webb," Vren finally said. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. "For you anyway, you've got 2 choices. Leave now and write this off as a failed survey, or wait for the EDF to arrive and explain to them why you threatened to orbital bombard civilians on a legal homestead. I'm thinking your corporate bosses wouldn't appreciate the attention." Marcus watched them go from his porch, coffee in hand, the same spot where this had all begun weeks ago. Shiva joined him as the last Dominion ship disappeared into the purple sky. "You saved us," she said simply. "We saved each other," Marcus corrected. "I just provided the stubbornness. You all provided everything else." He looked at the ranch, at the improvements the widows had made, at the children playing carefully supervised games near the barn. "The EDF will be here soon. They'll verify the homestead claim, make everything official. After that, the transport ship to New Haven should be safe to call. You'll finally be able to reach your sanctuary world. What if we do not wish to go? A place that feels like it could be home." She gestured at the ranch, the land, the endless purple grasslands. "You offered us 3 months. We have been here nearly that long, but if you would permit it, we would like to stay longer. Perhaps permanently." He looked at Tik-Tik, who was teaching a younger Thurai child how to feed the hexapods without getting bitten. He thought about the past weeks, the gradual transformation of his solitary existence into something larger and stranger, and if he was honest, better. "The barn's not big enough for permanent housing," he finally said. Shiva's antennae perked up with what Marcus had learned to recognize as surprised hope. We could build proper structures. The Velkins are skilled architects. We have materials from the ship, and the land provides much that can be used. We would not be a burden. But not a burden. He took a long drink of his coffee, watching the morning light spread across the grasslands. If you're staying, we do this properly. Real houses, not just converted barns. Proper water systems for the Morvani, school facilities for the kids. This place becomes a real settlement. Besides, I've gotten used to having engineers around who actually know what they're doing. My equipment hasn't run this smoothly in a decade. Captain Sarah Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who reminded Marcus uncomfortably of his younger self. She inspected the homestead claim with professional thoroughness, interviewed the widows individually, and reviewed the recordings of the Dominion's attempted seizure. "This is one of the strangest homestead applications I've ever processed," Chen said as she sat in Marcus's kitchen, accepting a cup of the terrible synthetic coffee without complaint. 11 alien widows, 23 children of various species, and one retired commander who apparently forgot he was retired when trouble showed up. The claim is legitimate, more than legitimate, actually. You've met every requirement for a multi-species cooperative settlement and then some. The improvements to the land, the integration of different species' needs and abilities, the defensive preparations. This could be a model for frontier integration. She paused. There's going to be a tension, though. The frontier worlds have been watching this situation. You become something of a symbol. I just want to work my ranch. That's exactly what I don't need. The EDF will maintain a monitoring presence in this system. Not intrusive, just enough to discourage corporate overreach. You've earned that much. The widows organized construction projects with impressive efficiency. The Velkins designed modular housing that could be adapted for different species' needs, using local stone and salvaged ship materials. The structures they built were beautiful in an alien way, organic curves that seemed to grow from the purple grasslands rather than being imposed upon them. The Morvani expanded the reservoir into a proper aquatic habitat, complete with underwater chambers and surface platforms. They discovered that certain native water plants had medicinal properties and began cultivating them, creating a small industry that could generate income. The Thurai, fascinated by Sarah's garden, expanded it dramatically, learning which earth plants could thrive in Kepler's soil and cross-pollinating them with native species to create entirely new varieties. Marcus found himself busier than he'd been in years, and stranger still, he found himself enjoying it. He supervised construction, mediated disputes between different species over resource allocation, and began teaching the older children the basics of ranch management. Tik-Tik had become his shadow, following Marcus everywhere and asking endless questions about Earth, animals, and why humans insisted on drinking terrible coffee. "It's not terrible," Marcus protested one morning as Tik-Tik watched him prepare his usual cup. "It's just efficient. Doesn't need special preparation. You just choose not to use it." Tik-Tik's compound eyes reflected the morning light. "Sarah would have made you use it. You told me she made you sit and watch storms." "We mature quickly." Tik-Tik shifted on his perch, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Will you teach me to shoot today? You promised." "That is long enough. And we start with basic safety, not actual shooting." 6 months after the Dominion's failed seizure, Webb's refuge had grown into a proper settlement. 24 structures dotted the landscape, each designed to blend with the terrain while meeting specific species needs. The population had grown as well. 3 more refugee families had arrived, directed there by the growing network of displaced persons who whispered about the human who'd stood against the Dominion and won. Marcus protested each new arrival, complained about the noise and the disruption, and then promptly helped them integrate into the community. He'd become the unofficial leader, though he refused any formal title. Shiva handled the administrative work, organizing councils and work rotations and education programs. But when disputes arose or difficult decisions needed making, people came to Marcus. "I didn't sign up for this," he told Shiva one evening as they reviewed expansion plans for a new agricultural section. "I came here to be alone." Her antennae moved in what Marcus had learned was her version of amusement. "You complain about company while building a community. You insist on isolation while adopting children. You are a contradiction, Marcus Webb. We can grow enough food to trade with other settlements. The Morvani medicines are already in demand. In 2 years, perhaps 3, Webb's Refuge could be a recognized township. Webb's Refuge sounds too much like a military operation. Children of a dozen species played in the common area, their laughter mixing in the evening air. In the distance, the triple suns were setting again, painting the sky in colors that still took his breath away after all these years. "Sarah's Landing," he said quietly. "My wife always said that anywhere worth settling was worth naming properly. She'd have liked this place." The chaos, the diversity, the stubborn refusal to give up. He smiled, feeling the familiar ache of her absence, but it was gentler now, mixed with something that might have been peace. "Yeah, Sarah's Landing, that fits. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses."